I drove the last dirt spur off H58 for 40 minutes before I got to the turnaround. It wasn't really a road anymore. It was two muddy tracks with a strip of grass growing up the middle and frost heaves every few yards. The pickup bottomed out twice. On the second one, the toolbox slid into the duffel and I had to pull over and move them back. That was most of what I owned. The machinist's toolbox, a duffel with clothes in it, a manila envelope with the divorce decree inside. The decree had been finalized in March, 4 weeks after the fabrication shop in Marquette laid me off. I kept the envelope up in the cab where I could see it. I don't know why. It wasn't like I needed to check whether the marriage was over. The paper had already done that. Peter Jackson was waiting at the turnaround when I got there. He stood beside an older station wagon with his hands in the pockets of a quilted vest. He was a thin man with white hair, combed flat, and wire glasses. He had the look of a man who belonged behind a desk, not at the end of a road that barely existed. He raised one hand when I got out. "You must be Chase." "Yeah." "Peter Jackson." He came over and looked past me at the bed of the pickup. "That all of it?" "Pretty much." He nodded like I'd given him a measurement. The trail started at the edge of the turnaround and went up through the spruce. The tower stood on top of the bluff, all steel legs and timber walls. There were 62 stairs to the cab. Peter counted them out loud for the first part, then stopped around 30. He was breathing hard. I didn't say anything. I was breathing hard too. The tower had been decommissioned years ago, he told me, but the structure was sound. The cab sat on the granite with the windows facing north. When we got to the top, I looked through them and saw Lake Superior filling the whole side of the world. It was gray-blue under the afternoon light. No boats. No shoreline that I could make out. Just water going on until it met the sky. "That's the view," Peter said. "I can see that." He showed me the bunk, the little stove, and the weather instruments mounted outside the cab. There was a binder on a shelf beside the door, swollen from damp. "Grounds need to stay clear," he said. "Brush, fallen limbs, that sort of thing. Wind, temperature, visibility get logged twice a day, morning and evening. Conservancy wants it in the binder." "How much?" $600 a month. Housing's free. Nobody to answer to." He looked toward the windows. "You can stay through October if you last." I figured 600 wasn't much, but free housing made the number less stupid. Besides, I wasn't in a position to be particular. After the layoff, I'd stopped answering calls from people who used to know me. After the decree, there were fewer of those calls anyway. Peter took me back down to the shed at the trailhead. It was a low wooden building with a door that dragged over the threshold. Inside, there were propane cylinders stacked along one wall, some empty water jugs, and a radio bolted to a shelf. "VHF base radio," he said. "Only line out. No cell signal anywhere on the bluff." He showed me how to turn it on and which channel to use. The speaker gave a short burst of static when he tested it, then went quiet again. A steel footlocker with a padlock sat behind them. The lock was old and brown with rust. "What's in that?" "Well, that isn't Conservancy property." Peter adjusted his glasses. "Probably the supply driver's spare parts. Leave it be." I looked at the lock a little longer than I needed to. "Supplies come every 10 days, he said. "A man named Kingston Cox brings propane, water, mail. Last caretaker quit without notice in November. Left the tower unheated all winter." "What happened to him?" Peter rubbed one thumb across the other. "Nothing happened, far as I know. He quit." That was about the size of the answer. He showed me where the road washed out near the bottom of the hill and pointed out a stack of split wood under a tarp. Then he asked why I'd wanted the job. There wasn't much point lying. Nobody else was there to impress. I wanted somewhere people wouldn't look for me. Peter waited. After the shop laid me off, I stopped answering calls. Then the divorce went through. I didn't feel like talking to anybody who knew me before. I looked down at the dirt between us. It had thawed on top and was still frozen underneath. Peter glanced up at the tower. The road keeps most people honest about wanting solitude. Then he got in his station wagon and drove down the spur. I watched the car rock through the ruts until it disappeared between the trees. My toolbox was heavier than it looked. I carried it up first, one step at a time, then went back for the duffel. By the time I reached the cab, my hands were shaking and my shoulder had gone numb. I set the toolbox down on the cab floor and stood at the north window with the whole lake in front of me and no one below. I slept in the cab the first night, and the next 5 days went pretty much the way I wanted them to. I got up before the sun and made coffee on the little stove. The coffee wasn't anything special. Ground stuff in a plastic tub, water from one of the jugs, and a metal cup that got too hot to hold. But it was hot, and nobody was there to ask me how I slept. Around 7, I took the binder out to the catwalk. The anemometer was mounted on top of the cab. It had 3 little cups that spun when there was wind, though most mornings they barely moved. I wrote down the temperature from the thermometer by the window, then looked across the lake and put down my best guess for visibility. There wasn't a gauge for that. You just looked at the far shore and decided how much of it you could see. Clear, hazy, poor. Pretty scientific, if you don't think about it too hard. I logged everything in the Conservancy binder. Wind, temperature, visibility, cloud cover. 7 in the morning and 7 at night, every day. Nobody had explained what happened to the numbers after I wrote them down. Maybe Peter came through once a month and collected the binder. Maybe it sat there until October and got thrown in a drawer somewhere. I didn't know. I liked writing them down anyway. There was something about putting a number beside a date that made the day seem useful. April 20th, 41 degrees. Wind from the north at maybe 5 miles an hour. Visibility good. You could look at that and know what had happened, even if nothing had. After the morning log, I usually walked the bluff trail. The trail ran through spruce and birch along the edge of the bluff, then dropped toward a rocky stretch where the trees opened up. I didn't go all the way down every time. Some days I walked until I got tired and turned around. Other days I went farther, just to have somewhere to go. I never saw a vehicle on the road. That was one of the better parts. No supply wagon, no station wagon, no person pulling up with a question. The road stayed empty, and the woods stayed quiet. Once, I found fresh tracks from something small crossing the mud. Probably a fox or a dog. I didn't see the animal. At night, I made the second entry in the binder and washed the cup out with a little water. Then I'd sit near the north window until I got tired enough to sleep. On the evening of the 23rd, the air was damp and flat. The lake looked like a sheet of dull metal, and there wasn't enough wind to move the anemometer. I was sitting on the catwalk with the coffee cup between my boots when I heard the horn. It was low and far away. The sound came across the water and seemed to hang there after it stopped. Then it came again. It wasn't loud, but I felt it in my chest. I went inside and checked the radio, though I knew the radio wasn't making it. The speaker was dark and silent. There wasn't anybody on the road either. I stood by the window and listened for the next blast. After a while, I figured it was the fog signal from the abandoned harbor works at the point named Au Sable. Peter had mentioned the place when he showed me the map, or maybe I'd read it in one of the papers left in the cab. Either way, it made sense. Sound carries a long way over flat water when the air isn't moving. The horn only reached the tower on nights like that. I hadn't spoken a word out loud in 3 days. I noticed it while I was washing the cup. I opened my mouth to say something, though I didn't know what, and then stopped. There wasn't anyone around to hear me. Saying it would have been like talking to the stove. I didn't mind the silence. That bothered me a little. On the morning of the 24th, I opened the duffel and took out the manila envelope. The divorce papers were still inside. I hadn't looked at them since I left Marquette, and I didn't look at them now. The envelope had picked up a crease across the middle. I folded it once more and put it in the bottom of my toolbox under the wrenches. It fit there better than it had in the duffel. The toolbox was where things went when I didn't want to see them but still wanted to know where they were. Billy was different. I didn't have his number written down. I knew it. I had one call left that mattered, and it wasn't to Peter or the county or anybody from the shop. Billy was 13, which meant he was old enough to know when I was avoiding him and young enough to think it might be his fault. I decided to drive into Grand Marais and use the payphone. The truck started after 3 tries. I let it run while I locked the toolbox in the bed and checked the fuel gauge. There was enough for town and back, probably. It took 40 minutes to get down, and I didn't want to learn how far an empty tank would carry me on the spur. I went back into the cab for the key. The binder was open on the desk. I looked at the morning entry before I closed it. 38 degrees. Wind 0. Visibility good. Same as yesterday, more or less. Then I locked the cab, went down the full flight of 62 stairs with 2 quarters in my coat pocket, and started the truck. The drive down took 40 minutes, same as it had going up, except downhill the ruts felt worse. The truck bounced enough to make the coins in my jacket pocket knock together. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other against the door where the latch was loose. Every time I hit a hole, the door jumped a little. I didn't mind the drive. It gave me time to figure out what I was going to say. That didn't help much. Grand Marais was quiet around midday. There were a few cars parked by the store and a pickup with a plow still mounted on the front, though there wasn't any snow left to plow. I pulled in beside the building and shut the truck off. The payphone was bolted to the outside wall under a little metal hood. It had a black receiver and a row of numbers worn smooth from use. I put the quarters in and dialed the house. It rang 3 times. Then Aubrey answered.
Hello?
It's me. There was a pause.
Chase?
Yeah.
Where are you?
Kettle Bluff.
I know where the job is.
Her voice was flat.
Billy asked twice where you went. Twice.
I've been meaning to call.
You've been gone 9 days.
I looked across the street at the empty storefronts. One had a faded sign in the window and another had plywood over the door. The town looked smaller than I remembered, though I hadn't been there in years. I got settled in, I said.
Are you going to talk to him or not?
I didn't answer fast enough. She handed the phone over. I could hear Billy breathing before he spoke.
Hi, Dad.
Hey.
Is it the kind you can climb or is it fenced off?
The tower?
Yeah. Is it the kind you can climb?
It's 62 steps up. There's a catwalk all the way around the cab.
62? Like you counted them?
I counted them.
Can you see the lake from up there? Can you see boats? What kind of boats?
You can see the lake. There isn't much boat traffic this time of year.
Can I see it?
The question came out plain. You can come up in June.
June?
I've got a bunk in the tower. You can use that one. We can walk the catwalk and watch the boats go by.
A whole week?
A whole week. I'll send it in writing. There was a pause on his end.
Okay,
he said quietly. I knew that okay. He didn't believe me yet. I'll send it tomorrow.
Actual June? Actual June.
He breathed into the phone again. I could hear something in the background, maybe the television or a door closing. I wanted to ask him what he'd been doing, but I wasn't sure how to start. 9 days was a long stretch to leave a 13-year-old with no explanation. Billy asked me about the tower instead. That was easier.
Does it have electricity?
Some.
Like enough for a television?
No television.
Okay.
I could have kept talking, but the phone made a clicking sound in my ear. One of the quarters was almost gone. I've got to go, I said.
Okay.
I'll write you.
Okay.
I hung up and left my hand resting on the receiver. I had said it, and now it was the only thing I was actually working toward. The job, the tower, The $600, all of it was tied to getting him up there for that week. I had no idea if I could make it work, but I knew I had to. I went inside the store. It smelled like coffee, cardboard, and something fried. There were shelves of canned food along the walls and a glass case with sandwiches in it. A woman stood behind the counter wearing an apron over a sweatshirt. She had reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain and auburn hair clipped up on top of her head. I picked up a paper cup of coffee and a pack of batteries. "That all for you?" she asked. "That's it." She rang it up and looked at me. "Oh, you're the new fella at Kettle Bluff." "I guess." "Where are you staying then?" "Kettle Bluff." "Oh, I know. I meant, are you up in the tower already?" "Yeah." She put the batteries in a small paper bag. "I'm Zoe Cox." I nodded. "My husband runs that supply road up there. He brings the propane and water and mail, all that stuff. He'll look after you, you know." I took the coffee and batteries. She counted out my change while I stood there with the warm cup in my hand. "Kingston runs that road. He'll look after you," she said, and handed me my change. For 3 days, I did the same things I'd been doing. Up at dawn, coffee on the stove, weather log at 7. Then the trail in the afternoon with the loppers. Evening log at 7 again. Nothing came up the road. No supply truck yet. No hikers. No lost people looking for the lake or some scenic spot they saw on a map. Just the wind in the trees and that horn sometimes, way out over the water when the air went still. I had the weather binder on the desk by then, starting to get a little weight to it. Not much, but enough pages filled in that it looked like somebody had been there before me. Wind northwest. Temperature 32. Visibility 6 miles. Same kind of stuff. The night of April 27th got cold after dark. I had the stove running low and my coat hanging over the chair, but there was a draft coming along the floor by the cot. It kept getting under the blanket and finding my ankles. I rolled over once and pulled the blanket tighter. Didn't help. The draft was steady, not like wind around the windows. This was coming from below, cold enough it felt like somebody had cracked open a freezer door under the bed. I got up and knelt beside the cot. The floorboards were old pine, painted gray a long time ago and worn smooth in spots. I held my hand near the floor and moved it around. There it was. One board under the cot had warped up at one edge. It didn't look like much, just a thin, dark line where it had pulled away from the board beside it. I moved the cot over enough to get at it. The steel legs scraped on the floor and made a sound that seemed louder than it ought to have. Then I went to my toolbox and found a flathead screwdriver. I used that screwdriver more than anything else in there. It had a yellow handle and a bent tip from some job years ago. Still worked fine. The board came up hard. I had to work the screwdriver under it and lean on the handle until the wood gave with a little crack. It lifted maybe 3 inches at first. There was a space under there between the joists. I held the lamp down close and saw something shoved flat against the far side. Paper, or what had once been paper. I reached in with 2 fingers and pulled it loose. It was a spiral notebook with a blue cover gone gray from water. The cardboard had swollen up around the edges. Half the wire spiral was rusted orange. I sat on the cot and opened it careful. The first page had a name written inside the front cover, Patrick Garza. Under that was a phone number scratched out so hard the paper had torn through in places. I didn't know who Patrick was. Peter had said the last caretaker quit in November, but that was about it. Most of his stuff was gone, Peter said. Apparently not all of it. The first pages weren't much to look at. Chore lists, propane levels, notes about where the trail needed clearing. Patrick had written down a bear he saw near the lower switchback in September. Black one, rooting around under a fallen spruce. There was a note about a gale, too. 3 days of it. He wrote that the cab shook hard enough one morning that his coffee walked right off the desk and hit the floor. I looked over at my own coffee cup sitting beside the binder. That would take some wind. In the margins, he kept count of how long it had been since he'd talked to anybody, not called anybody, talked out loud. The numbers went up beside the regular entries. 6 days, 9 days, 14. I understood that more than I wanted to. Then I got about 10 pages in, and the writing changed. It got smaller, cramped down tight near the lines. The lists stopped. There were still dates, but not much else regular about it. October 2nd had a whole page. Patrick had been up on the catwalk after dark. He looked down toward the trees at the bottom of the tower and saw something standing there. He called it tall, hunched over. Its head was tilted too far back, facing up at the lit windows. I read that part twice. Patrick wrote that he stayed there for 90 minutes watching it. The thing didn't move. He shined his flashlight down at it more than once, but nothing looked back. No eyes caught the beam, nothing reflected. In the morning, he went down to look. The ferns below the tower had been pressed flat in a patch. He wrote that it had a shape, but not one he knew. Not a bed, not tracks, not any animal he'd seen. That was all there was on the page. I closed the notebook and sat there with both hands on it. The lamp hissed a little behind me. Outside, the windows were black except for the faint shape of the catwalk railing. I opened it again. The words were still there. Patrick Garza had written them in pen, and then hidden the whole thing under a floorboard. I didn't know why he hadn't taken it with him when he quit. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he didn't. I put the board back over the empty space and pushed the cot where it had been. The warped edge still showed along the floor. I set the notebook on the desk beside the weather binder. Then I left the lamp burning and lay on the cot with the notebook on the desk where I could see it. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the lamp burning like Patrick said, which felt stupid even while I was doing it, and I lay there listening to the stove tick and the wind not blowing. Every time I almost drifted off, I'd think about a head tilted back too far, looking up at a lit window, and my eyes would come open again. By morning, I gave up trying. I skipped the trail walk. I made coffee, pulled the notebook onto my lap at the desk, and read it through page by page this time, slower, taking in every word instead of skimming for the parts that scared me. Patrick had turned into a different kind of writer by the middle of it. Less chores, more counting. He'd worked it out over what looked like 5 or 6 nights, same as I would have, and he wrote it up clean like a checklist. No wind on the anemometer, no moon, and the Sable Point horn carrying up the bluff, because it turned out that horn only reached the tower when the air went dead still, same as I'd already guessed on my own. He underlined that those were also the nights nobody drove the road, not one truck. He'd noticed that before I ever thought to. There was a page where he wrote about standing on the catwalk and yelling as loud as he could, just to see how far his own voice would carry on one of those nights. He said it died inside 40 yards, swallowed up. I read that twice and then didn't read it again. The last pages that still made sense were the worst ones. He was begging whoever came after him to stay inside on those nights and keep the lamp lit. Then, underlined 3 times, hard enough the pen had cut through the paper a little, never trust the man who brings the supplies. I shut the notebook and let my coffee go cold without touching it again. Then I pulled my own binder over, the weather log, and paged back through the week I'd already recorded without thinking much about it. 3 nights the anemometer had read 0. One of those nights I'd heard the horn and gone to bed without so much as looking down at the trees. I didn't like that. I put on my coat and went down the tower stairs, 62 of them, and this time I didn't stop at the trail. I walked straight into the spruce at the base of the tower, off any path at all, pushing branches out of my face. It took maybe 30 feet of pushing through the spruce before I found it. A patch of ferns, last year's growth, brown and dead, pressed flat into the needles underneath. Not trampled looking. Pressed, like something heavy had laid down there and stayed a long time without moving. I didn't see one track leading into it or out of it. Nothing broken on the way in. Nothing disturbed on the way out. Just the flat spot, sitting there in the middle of everything else standing up fine around it. I crouched at the edge of it. Didn't step in. Didn't much want to. From right where I was kneeling, I could look straight up between the tower legs and see my own window, the one with the lamp still burning inside from the night before, small and yellow way up there against the gray sky. And behind me, through the trunks, I could see the dirt road, close enough that anything standing here would have had a clear line to both. I stayed crouched there a minute longer, looking at the pressed down ferns. Then I got up and walked back out of the trees without ever putting a boot inside that patch. From the exact spot where it would have stood, I looked up again at my own window. I heard the truck before I saw it. Low gears grinding up the switchbacks, engine working hard against the grade. I'd been up since dawn with Patrick's notebook still on my mind, and the sound of a motor climbing that road was a relief. I climbed down all 62 steps and out to the turnaround. A flatbed rounded the last bend, propane cylinders lashed down and back, and a man was talking before he even had the door open. "There he is," he said, swinging out of the cab. "New fella at Kettle Bluff. Peter told me you started up here, couple weeks back now?" He was a big man, heavy through the middle, wearing a mesh cap over thinning hair. His face had that permanent red look from years outdoors. He grabbed my hand with both of his and shook it like he meant it. "Kingston Cox," he said. "I run this road for the Conservancy. You're stuck with me every 10 days whether you like it or not." "Chase," I said. "Chase. Good. All right." He was already moving to the truck bed. "Got your propane, got your water, got a sack of mail somebody dropped off in town, and this." He handed me a paper bag, warm through the paper. "Pasties," he said. "Denise, my wife Zoe, made these fresh this morning before I left. Meat and potato. Take 2, there's plenty." I said thanks. It smelled good enough that I almost opened it right there. We worked the propane cylinders off the truck together, him doing most of the lifting even though I offered. Then the water jugs, 5 gallons each, heavier than they looked. Then the mail sack, canvas, tied at the top with a leather strap. Kingston walked the grounds with me while I set the jugs by the shed. He pointed out where the road washed out every spring thaw, a stretch about a mile down where the culvert never held. 11 years I've run this," he said. "Know that fog signal better than the Coast Guard does, I'd bet you money. It don't sing every night. Only sings on the dead ones. No wind, no moon. Learned that my first winter up here." I kept quiet about that. I'd learned it myself, the hard way, out of a dead man's notebook. "Found something under the floorboards," I said instead. "Notebook. Belonged to a fella named Patrick." Kingston's face went flat for about half a second, just stopped moving entirely, like somebody had hit pause on it. Then he laughed, loud, and shook his head. "Patrick Garza," he said. "Now there's a name I hadn't heard in a while. That's a sore subject around here, hey? How's that?" "Drunk," Kingston said. "Cracked up bad, out here alone too long. Talked about lights, shapes, all kinds of stuff that wasn't there. Left in the middle of the night back in November. Didn't even wait for his last check. It's still sitting in the Conservancy office down in Grand Marais, far as I know." I thought about the handwriting in that notebook. It hadn't read like a drunk man's handwriting. It had read like a man counting days. "What's in the shed?" I asked. "Just my own gear," Kingston said. "Tools, chains, all locked up in the footlocker." He walked back to the truck and came back with a new brass padlock still in its plastic packaging. "Gonna swap this out for you. Old one's rusted clean through." He worked it onto the hasp while I watched, snapped it shut, tested it once with a hard tug. "There," he said. "Good as new." I'd sealed a letter to Billy before I ever heard the truck coming, figuring I'd need to catch him whenever he showed. I pulled it out of my coat and handed it over. "Could you drop this at the post office? Marquette address. Coarse. He tucked it into his shirt pocket, patted it once like he was making sure it'd stay. Then he looked at me, still friendly, still easy. Who else is expecting to hear from you? Family? Anybody like that? Somebody who'd notice if you went a couple weeks quiet? The boy, I said. Nobody else. Kingston nodded like that was the answer he'd been waiting on the whole time. That's the whole reason men come to a place like this, he said, and clapped me on the arm hard enough to rock me a little. Then he climbed up into the cab. The flatbed rolled back down the hill the way it came, engine grinding low against the grade until the trees swallowed the sound of it. I held the warm bag of pasties and looked at the new brass padlock shining on the shed hasp. By the time the truck sound was gone, the pasties were cold. I ate them anyway. Meat and potato, crust hard around the edges, but they were still better than most of what I made for myself. I swapped out the propane tanks, carried the water jugs into the cab, and put Kingston's brass padlock on the shed hasp. Then I brought the notebook upstairs. The lamp was burning on the desk. My letter to Billy was gone from my pocket, headed down the hill in Kingston's shirt pocket, and that was about as much contact with the outside world as I was going to get for a while. I opened the notebook to where I'd stopped. Patrick's writing had gotten smaller by then, not messier, smaller, like he was trying to fit more of it into the space he had left. The shape never made it upstairs. It never touched the windows. It stayed out by the trees. I read those 3 lines twice. He'd written them under an entry about the 11th sighting. He'd been keeping count. 6 nights of seeing the same thing below the tower, always standing where the trees opened up, always looking toward the light. Then he had written something else. I wasn't what it was watching. I turned the page over and looked back at it because the sentence was written again on the next line. I wasn't the thing it watched. The second one was underlined. Then he had drawn a box around it and written the rest in the space below. It was looking at the road. I sat there with my hand on the page. That changed it. Up until then, I figured Patrick had seen something and made it bigger by watching it night after night. A person in the trees, maybe. A bear standing up. Some trick of distance and bad light. The kind of thing that gets worse when you're alone and have nobody around to tell you you're wrong. But if it wasn't looking at him, then it had been looking past him. At the road, the next entries were about engines. Patrick heard one after dark on a night when no delivery was scheduled. He didn't see the truck, just heard it working up the switchbacks below the tower. Another night he heard an engine stop, then start again after a few minutes. On one of those nights, the shape turned its head. Patrick said it happened slowly, away from the tower and toward the sound of the engine. That was the part I didn't like. I knew what an engine sounded like on that road. Kingston's flatbed worked hard coming up, gears grinding and the whole truck shaking against the grade. You could hear it before you saw it. But this had happened after dark, when there wasn't supposed to be anybody coming. I kept reading. The second to last entry said Patrick had gone down to the shed and found that someone had been inside the cab while he was gone. His mail had been opened. His weather log had been taken apart and put back together. He counted the pages before and after. Nothing was missing. He wrote that somebody had been counting them. I looked at my own binder on the desk. It was closed, with the week's weather entries inside. I had never thought about somebody touching it. There wasn't anybody here to touch it. At the bottom of the page, Patrick wrote that he had started hiding the notebook under the floor. The last entry was only 3 lines. He had told the driver he was leaving early. The driver had offered to come up that night and help him load. He was going to sit on the catwalk with the lamp on until sunrise. The pages after that were gone, torn out at the spine, not cut. I ran my thumb along the rough paper stubs and counted them. There were 6. I had no idea what 10 pages could hold. Maybe nothing. Maybe the part that explained where he went. I shut the notebook and left it beside the weather binder on the desk. 3 days went by after that. May 1st came with a low gray sky and no wind. I did the morning log, checked the water, and walked down to the shed after lunch. The radio was mounted on the wall beside the workbench, where Peter had said it would be. I picked up the handset and turned the knob until I found the Conservancy channel. It took him a minute to answer.
Well, go ahead.
Peter, it's Chase.
Yes, I know who it is.
I've got a question about Patrick. There was a pause. Static hissed in the handset.
Well, what about him?
Kingston said he vanished in the night. Said he left without waiting for his last check.
That's right.
You told me he quit.
Well, he did quit. He just didn't come down and fill out the proper paperwork, and that's about the size of it.
Did anybody go looking?
Looking where?
Here, the tower, the road. Peter breathed into the radio. It sounded thin and close.
Chase, there was no reason to file a report. He was an adult man. He left his position.
His check was never collected.
Yes.
And nobody checked on him?
On whose behalf? There was nobody to file one. They both came out here the way you did. Alone and glad of it.
I held the handset tighter. Both? Peter didn't answer right away.
The caretaker before Patrick,
He said.
Marcus Fenn. He quit abruptly in 2021. Never sent for the tools he left in the shed.
Did anybody file a report on him?
No.
Why not?
Well, same reason. There was nobody to file one for. He came out here alone, and he left on his own. That's about the size of it.
I looked around the shed. Propane cylinders stood in a row against the far wall. Behind them was the steel footlocker with Kingston's new brass padlock on it. I set the radio handset down in the shed and stood there with the door open, looking at the padlock. 2 days went by before I drove down again. I spent most of May 2nd doing nothing useful. Checked the water, split a little wood, and walked around the tower without going far enough into the trees to see the pressed down ferns. I kept thinking about that padlock on the shed and the way Peter had talked about 2 men leaving without anybody asking where they went. By the morning of May 3rd, I had a letter in my pocket and a question I needed answered. I got to the store 40 minutes later. Same ruts, same loose latch on the truck door, same trees crowding the road on both sides. This time I had a reason to be there besides coffee and batteries. I wanted to know if the letter I'd given Kingston had made it to the post office. The payphone was mounted outside the store under a little metal roof. It smelled like old rain and cigarette smoke, though nobody was standing around smoking. I put in the coins and dialed the number from memory. Billy answered on the 4th ring.
Hello?
It's me. There was a pause, not a long one.
Dad?
Yeah, how's it going?
Okay.
He said it quiet, the way he did when it wasn't really okay.
Did you get the mail?
I was going to ask you that.
Oh.
I could hear something running in the background. A washing machine, maybe. Or the furnace. It was hard to tell through the phone. Did the letter come? I asked.
No letter came. Mom checked.
Can you ask her again?
She's right here.
I heard him move the phone. There was some muffled talking, then Aubrey came on.
Chase?
Hey.
9 days. Nothing came.
She said it flat. Then she said it again.
9 days. Nothing came.
I looked out across the parking lot while she talked. There were 2 pickups by the store and a stack of salt bags beside the door. A gull was picking at something near the curb. I watched it pull at a scrap of paper and felt my hand tighten around the phone. I'll bring the June dates in writing next trip, I said. Hand them to him myself if I have to.
You said you'd send it.
Billy said. He must have taken the phone back. I did send it. I had no answer for him. Neither did he. We stayed quiet for a few seconds, listening to each other breathe through the line. Then I said I'd talk to him soon and hung up. The letter had left the bluff in Kingston's shirt pocket. I had watched him put it there. He'd patted the pocket afterward, like he was making sure it stayed put. It had not reached a mailbox 11 miles away. I sat in the truck with the engine off and worked that through a couple times. There weren't many ways for a letter to disappear between the tower and town. It could fall out. Kingston could forget it. He could lose it in the cab with the rest of his junk. Or he could have taken it somewhere else. That was the one I kept coming back to, which didn't make it true. I know the difference. A thing can bother you without being evidence. I stepped through the door and bought coffee. Zoe was behind the counter, wearing her reading glasses on the beaded chain and sorting a box of canned goods. She looked up when I came in. "Oh, you're back down again," she said. "Kingston must have left you needing half the store, you know." "Just coffee." "Well, that's what everybody says till they see the batteries. Then it's batteries, crackers, and something sweet for the road." After charging me, she looked at me and put the coffee in a paper cup. I stood by the counter, my change already in hand. "Kingston come through here yesterday?" I asked. "Oh, barely see him on the fog nights. He likes the back roads when the air is flat and there's no traffic on them." She said it like she was talking about a man who liked fishing or kept his radio too loud. "How far does he go on those nights?" She shrugged and pushed the cup toward me. "Never asked. He's been doing it since before we got married. You know how men are about their roads." "Yeah." I paid and took the coffee. She started telling me about something else. Some delivery that had come in short a case of bottled water, but I didn't stay long enough to hear how it ended. I said thanks and went back outside. The truck was still where I'd left it. I climbed in, set the coffee in the holder, and pulled out the binder where I kept the weather notes. 3 zero-wind nights were already logged. I found the dates and wrote Horn beside the ones where I'd heard it. The word looked small in the margin. Just 4 letters, nothing to it. I closed the binder and drove back up. I reached the trailhead in the late afternoon. I parked at the turnaround, checked the brass padlock on the shed, and started up the 62 steps. The next 3 days went by without anybody coming up the road. I checked the water, split some wood, and kept the lamp off after midnight. That last part wasn't hard. Once the sun went down, there wasn't much to do besides read, and I could read with a flashlight if I had to. The tower looked different without the yellow window above it. On the morning of May 6th, I heard the truck working up the hill. I was already at the turnaround by the time the flatbed came around the bend. The road was dry now, mostly. Dust came up behind the tires and hung there between the trees. Kingston leaned out the window before he got the door open. "Morning, Chase," he called. "Beautiful day for ruining another set of tires, hey?" "Looks dry." "Dry don't mean easy." He climbed down and slapped the side of the truck. "Got propane and water, same as last time. You sleep any better?" "About 6 hours." "That all?" "Usually." He looked up toward the tower. The catwalk showed through the trees, and the windows were dark in the morning light. "That lamp been burning past midnight?" "Some nights." "How many?" I set my hand on one of the propane cylinders. It was cold from sitting in the shade. "Most of them." "Reading?" "Sometimes." Kingston grunted like he'd expected something else. We got the cylinders off first. He took the heavy end and I carried the other, though there wasn't much point pretending we were sharing the work evenly. Kingston could lift 2 of them at once if he wanted to. Then we brought up the water jugs, 5 gallons each. I carried one at a time and stacked them inside the cab while he kept talking. "You know that light can be seen from the water, right?" "How far?" "Depends on the night. Clear air, you can see it from a long way out. Fog, maybe not at all." "There isn't much boat traffic." "No, there isn't." He set an empty jug beside the shed. "Still doesn't hurt to know who's looking at what." I looked at him. He was smiling, but not as much as usual. Next runs the 16th, he said. I won't be up before then. Road costs me a set of tires a year as it is. I start making extra trips. I'll be buying tires every other month, hey. 16th. That's right. You need something, you tell Peter before then. Don't wait till you're out of water. I won't. The last of the water went into the shed. Kingston stacked the empty jugs by the door, one on top of another. He did it slow, like he had something else to say and was waiting for the right place to put it. He looked back at me. That notebook you found, you still got it? I had been expecting the question since I heard his truck. No. He kept one hand on the top jug. What happened to it? I burned it, first cold night. The shed was quiet except for the little tick of metal cooling somewhere inside the truck. Kingston looked at me for a moment. Not long. Just long enough that I could see the friendly part of his face go still. That was the smart thing. Seemed like it. Yeah, he nodded once. Smart thing. He picked up the last empty jug and carried it around the side of the shed. The brass padlock hung from the hasp. Kingston checked it as he went past, giving it a hard tug with 2 fingers. He did that without looking down, like he had checked it 100 times before. The lock held. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. See you on the 16th, Chase? Yeah. He waved through the open window and backed around the turnaround. The flatbed started down the grade, engine dragging in the low gears. I watched until the dust settled and the trees closed over the road. I brought the notebook out from under the floorboard before I took my coat off. The board came up easier now that I'd worked the warped edge loose. Patrick had hidden it in the joist cavity under the cot, where the floor stayed dark even when the lamp was on. I carried it to the machinist's toolbox and opened the lid. The wrenches were in the bottom tray. I moved them aside and put the notebook underneath, then set the brown paper envelope on top. The envelope had been in there since I came up, and I hadn't opened it. I didn't need another thing in my head. I shut the toolbox and turned the latch. By evening, I had the lamp lit again. I opened the binder to the back and started a new column. I wrote the date at the top, then made 3 spaces underneath it. Wind, moon, horn. The old entries were in the front. They told me what the weather had done. This was different. I was trying to find out what happened on the nights when the air went still. I checked the anemometer through the window on the north wall. 4 miles an hour. The moon was 3/4 full, hanging low over the trees. I listened for the horn and heard nothing. I wrote the first entry in the new column. Wind 4, moon 3/4, no horn. 2 more nights went by before anything worth writing down happened. The first one was May 7th. Wind out of the west, 2 miles an hour at 7, then nothing by midnight. No horn. I wrote it in the new column and went to bed. The next night was different. At 7 p.m. on May 8th, the anemometer read 0. The cups weren't turning at all. Not slow. Not catching every few seconds. Just sitting there. I wrote wind 0, moon 3/4, and left the horn space blank. By full dark, the horn from the point at Au Sable had started up. It was louder than I'd heard it before. Its long, low notes carried across the lake and up the bluff. I could feel a little vibration in the catwalk railing when it sounded, though that might have just been the tower moving under me. I took the flashlight and went outside. The beam reached the trees below in a white circle that got smaller as soon as it touched the dark. I swept it from one side of the tower to the other, checking the whole arc of spruce. The flattened patch was still there, about 30 feet from the tree's edge. The ferns around it stood up. The ones in the middle stayed pressed down. No one was in the patch. I moved the light farther left, then back again. Nothing. The horn kept sounding behind me, and every time it went quiet, I could hear the lake below the bluff. A little water against the shore. Some branches rubbing together. the tower making its small metal noises. I stayed on the catwalk. I didn't have any reason to, exactly. I could have gone back inside and watched the same dark windows from the desk. The horn was going, and I wanted to see if it came back in still air. Around 11, I checked the trees again. At 12, I checked the road. It was empty. Then I saw a light below the tower. It wasn't a headlight, just one white spot moving between the trees, too high to be a flashlight on the ground and too low to be anything on the road. It stopped, then moved again. I killed my own flashlight and crouched beside the railing. The light came closer. For a second, I could see the man carrying it. Kingston's size, or close enough. Heavy shoulders under a jacket. Headlamp strapped around his forehead. He came up from the direction of the trailhead and walked into the trees with the light pointed down. He didn't call out. He never raised his eyes toward the tower. He just kept going, slow and careful, searching the ground. I stayed crouched there with one hand on the railing. I was terrified. There wasn't another word for it. The horn sounded again, and Kingston stopped. The light swung toward the tower's supports. I didn't wait to see what he did next. I slipped inside and started down the stairs, going faster than I should have. The metal steps shook under my boots. I grabbed the rail with both hands and missed one step near the bottom, caught myself, and hit the next one hard enough to jar my knee. I got off the tower and went into the trees. The spruce branches caught at my coat. I kept the flashlight off and worked toward the trailhead by feel, using the trunks for cover. I didn't go near the flattened patch. I knew where it was, even in the dark. The horn sounded behind me. Then the truck engine came through the trees. Low gears, the engine working against the hill. It had stopped somewhere below the turnaround, not at the shed. I could hear it idling through the trees, but I couldn't see the headlights. Kingston's headlamp moved near the road. He was still looking for something. I crouched behind a spruce and held my breath. The engine ran for another minute, maybe 2. Then the headlamp disappeared. The truck changed gears and started back down. I stayed there until I couldn't hear it anymore. At 1:20 a.m., a light breeze came off the lake. It moved through the branches and touched my face. At the same time, the horn stopped in the middle of a note. Not faded out. Stopped. The silence afterward was worse. I went back to the tower with the flashlight in my hand and the beam pointed at the ground. I kept my eyes on the path. The patch was still there. Whatever had been in it before, it hadn't needed to be standing there while I watched. I slept until late morning. When I went down to the trailhead, the mud was still soft from the rain earlier in the week. Tire tracks crossed the turnaround in a wide arc. They'd come up the road and stopped before the shed, out far enough that the truck couldn't reach the door. Then the tracks backed up. The tread was wide and deep, fresh enough that the edges hadn't slumped. Kingston wasn't due until May 16th. Nobody was expected on that road. I stood there looking at the tracks for a while. The truck had come up in the dark. Kingston had gotten out with his headlamp and gone into the trees. Then he'd come back and left without coming to the tower or the shed. That was what the tracks said anyway. The shed was secured with its brass padlock. I took out my conservancy key and tried it. The key went in partway, then stopped. Kingston's lock wasn't keyed to the conservancy set. I tried it again, because sometimes a key catches if you don't have it lined up right. Nothing. The radio was inside. It was the only way off the bluff besides walking down the road, and the only road led past the place where Kingston had stopped and turned around. I stood with the key in my hand and looked at the lock. On a night when the horn was sounding and nobody was supposed to be driving, a truck had come halfway up the road. I couldn't call anybody about it. That was the part that got to me. I went back to the tower and got the pry bar and framing hammer from the toolbox. I carried them down in the afternoon, when the sun was out and the road looked like a road again. The back corner of the shed had one board that was already loose along the bottom. I put the pry bar under it and tapped the handle with the hammer. The nails pulled a little at a time. I worked along the edge until it pulled loose enough to bend outward. There was a gap behind it, dark and narrow. I put one arm through first, then my shoulder. The wood caught on my coat, but I got inside. The shed smelled like dust, oil, and old mouse droppings. I ran my hand along the wall and touched the radio. The base set was cold under my fingers. I turned the knob. A small green light came on. I turned it back off and backed out through the gap. Then I tapped the board into place with the hammer, careful not to drive the nails all the way back. It didn't need to hold much, just needed to look like nobody had been in there. I pressed the loose board flat with my palm until it sat flush and walked away without looking back at it. Nothing much happened over the next 3 nights. Wind out of the northwest, then flat, then a little rain that didn't amount to anything. I logged all of it and didn't write horn in the margin once. May 11th was my 9th night of counting. At 7, the anemometer needle hadn't shifted off 0, same as the other times, and there was no moon at all, just a black sky with a few stars poking through. I logged the reading and didn't dwell on it. By 10:40, the fog signal out at Osable Point was ringing through loud and steady, nothing in the air to soften it. Wind, moon, horn. All 3 at once, the exact combination Patrick had boxed off in his notebook like it meant something. I was still at the desk with the pen in my hand when the little battery radio I keep going for company slid off the station into flat hiss. I hadn't touched it. I reached over and gave the dial a twist and it stayed hiss, so I shut it off. The window in front of the desk had gone black by then, black enough it turned into a mirror. I could see the whole room sitting behind me in the glass, the lamp, the cot, my own shoulders hunched over the binder. And past all that, way down past the reflection of my own room, right at the base of the tower where the trees start, there was a shape standing in among them. I turned around and looked at the real glass instead of the reflection. It was there. Gaunt, too tall for a man, hunched over like its own height was too much for it to carry straight. It wasn't moving. Its face was tipped back, pointed straight up at my window, at the light behind me, same as it had every night since I found that notebook. I didn't move either. I counted my own breaths, which is a stupid thing to do, but it's what I did, one after another, waiting for it to come across that open ground toward the stairs. It never came. Patrick had written that down too, more than once, boxed off and underlined the same way. Never came up the stairs, never touched a window, never came closer than the tree line. I knew that because I'd read it enough times by lamplight that I could have recited it without the book in front of me. That's when the headlights swung onto the dirt road. They came up fast, faster than anybody drives that road on purpose, fast enough I heard the truck bottom out twice on the ruts before it even cleared the trees. Nobody was due for 5 more days. The shape's head turned. Slow, the way a tree turns when the wind finally gets under it, away from my window and toward the road. It wasn't looking at me at all. It never had been. It was watching the road the same way Patrick wrote it, word for word, boxed twice on the page like he needed to tell himself twice before he'd believe it. I killed the lamp. I kept my hand on the switch in the dark and watched the flatbed grind up the last stretch and stop short of the turnaround. The engine cut. The headlights went with it. For a second, there was only black where the truck had been. Then a headlamp came on, small and white, and started bobbing as it moved. It wasn't headed for the shed. It was moving along the tree line toward the base of the stairs. In the dark, I found the toolbox by feel, pushed the wrenches aside, and pulled out the flashlight and the framing hammer. I left the flashlight off and put it in my coat pocket. Then I started down. Down all 62 steps I went in the dark, one hand on the rail, the hammer in the other. I've gone down those stairs enough times now that my feet knew where the worn ones were. I went quiet, the way you go when you don't want your own boots to give you away. The headlamp was still coming along the trees when I hit the last few steps. I stepped off the bottom stair into the wet needles seconds before that light reached it, and moved into the spruce. I moved when the horn sounded and stopped when it didn't. That was the only rule I had. Sound covered me, so I used it. When the note rolled up off the water, I took 3 steps, 4 if I could manage it quiet. When it cut off, I stood still with the hammer against my leg and waited for it to start again. Kingston wasn't hurrying either. I could hear his boots behind me in the needles, unhurried, a man walking a property he already owned. Once he called out, "Easy," like he was looking for me at the general store. "Chase, you up there, buddy?" I didn't answer that. I went past the flattened patch of ferns close enough to touch it. Nothing was standing in it. I didn't slow down to check. I'd looked at that patch enough times in daylight to know what nothing in it looked like, and I wasn't going to stop and confirm it with a flashlight off and a man behind me carrying a pry bar. The shed came up dark against the trees. I found the back corner by feel, the board I'd already pulled loose once before, and got my fingers under the edge. It came free easier this time. I pushed my shoulders through the gap same as before and reached into the dark until my hand found the radio. I got the power on and the mic off the hook and keyed it before I let myself think about how loud that click was going to sound. "Kettle Bluff Fire Tower," I said low and fast. "Last spur off H58 east of Grand Marais. I've got one man on the property who isn't supposed to be here. Send somebody. Now." I don't know if anybody heard it. That's when the light hit me. It came through the open board sideways, caught me square, and I had about half a second to see the shape it was throwing before Kingston filled up the doorway behind it. He had the pry bar down at his side, easy, like it was a tool and not a thing he meant to use on me. The friendly voice was gone. "The road's too long to run, Chase," he said. Flat, calm, the way a man reads a weather report. "The town's too far to hear you." Then he came at me. I got the hammer up. It wasn't enough time to do much else. The bar caught me across the shoulder and the side of the head at once, one motion, and the whole left side of my skull went white and ringing. My legs quit under me. I went down in the mud outside the door, hands first, knees second, the cold of the snowmelt coming up through my palms. I stayed down. Everything was noise and no noise at the same time, a high whine in one ear and nothing at all in the other, and I waited for the next hit. It didn't come. Kingston had stopped moving. I could hear that much, even through the ringing, and past him, out in the trees where the horn had been going all night, there was nothing, no wind, no note rolling up off the water, just flat black quiet across the whole bluff. I got my eyes up. The headlamp was already moving away from me, fast, back along the tree line toward where the flatbed sat. It bounced hard with each stride, Kingston running heavy and unused to it. Then it went out. He didn't come back. I don't know how long I knelt there in the mud before my arms would hold me. Not long. Long enough that the cold worked all the way into my knees. I dragged myself back through the loose board into the shed, one arm mostly useless, and got my back up against the propane cylinders and the footlocker with its brass lock still cold against my spine. I found the mic again in the dark. "I'm hit," I said. "I'm staying put." Nobody answered that either. I sat there with the handset still shut in my fist and the hammer laid across my knees, and no sound at all came up that road for the rest of the night. The black outside the door had started going gray by the time I noticed I'd been sitting there that long. Long enough that my knees locked up stiff on the concrete. Long enough my ear quit ringing and just went dull, like it was stuffed with cotton. I didn't sleep. I kept the mic in my fist the whole time in case I had something else to say into it, but nothing came, and I didn't have anything else to say anyway. Light comes up slow through spruce. First, it's just a difference, not really light at all, more like the black getting thin in a couple places. Then all at once you can see shapes again. I heard the engine before I saw the truck. Higher note than Kingston's flatbed, working the ruts easier. It stopped at the turnaround and a door slammed and boots came up fast through the wet needles and a flashlight beam swung across the gap in the shed wall where I'd crawled through twice now. "Hello? Anybody in there?" "Here," I said. It came out about a quarter as loud as I meant it. The light found me sitting against the propane tanks with the hammer still across my knees. A man about my age, county jacket, came down on one knee in front of me. "Ray Kinnunen," he said. "You call this in?" "Yeah." He got a look at the side of my head and made a face like he didn't care for what he saw. "Okay, let's get you outside where I can see you right." He got a hand under my arm and I got my legs to work enough to stand, and we came out through the shed door instead of the board this time, out into gray light that hurt my eyes worse than the flashlight had. He had me sit on the tailgate of his truck while he pressed something against the cut. Asked if I could see two of him. I said one was plenty. Kingston's flatbed turned up a quarter-mile down the road, nose into the ditch, driver's door standing open. Keys still in it. No Kingston. Ray came back up from looking at it and didn't say much about that, just wrote something on a pad and looked at the shed a while. "That lock yours?" he asked, nodding at the brass padlock on the hasp. "No. His." He got a bolt cutter from his truck and it took 2 goes to bite through the shackle. The door swung open on the same tanks lined up same as always, and behind them the footlocker sitting low on the concrete with its own lock, smaller, but Ray went through that one just as easy. Inside was a ledger, hard-bound, and a bundle of driver's licenses and state IDs held together with a rubber band gone brittle and gray. Ray flipped the ledger open and turned it so I could see. Columns. Dates down one side, names down the other, all in the same hand, small and even. I found November without looking hard for it. Patrick Garza's name sat there, plain as anything. Above it, dated 2021, was another name, Marcus Fenn. Ray asked me to walk him through the night, all of it, and I did. I told him about the notebook I found under the floorboard my first week, and the letter Kingston never mailed for me, and the tire tracks that came halfway up the road on the 8th and stopped short of the shed before backing out again. I told him about the questions Kingston used to ask, real friendly, about whether anybody was checking in on me. I told him about the pry bar in the doorway and what Kingston said before he swung it. "The road's too long to run. The town's too far to hear you." Ray wrote most of it down. Then he stopped writing and looked at me a second. "What made him quit?" he said. "Man's got you down. He doesn't finish it. Why?" I didn't tell him about the shape at the tree line, or the way its head had turned toward the road before the headlights ever showed. I didn't have a way to say it that wouldn't make him look at me different than he already was. "I don't know," I said. He let that sit and didn't push it. I walked him out past the base of the tower stairs to show him where I'd gone into the trees, and there it was, same as it always was, that stretch of dead ferns pressed flat about 30 feet in. No tracks going into it, none coming out. Ray stood over it a minute. "Deer bedded down there," he said, and didn't write anything about it at all. He told me the ledger alone was enough to reopen Patrick's file, and that names like the ones in that bundle were going to open up cases that had probably been sitting closed for years. He said there'd be men on this road for a week, easy. Then he carried the footlocker out to his truck himself, one arm under it, and set it in the bed careful, like it might still bite somebody. I stood in the turnaround with dried mud caked stiff on both knees, looking down the road at Kingston's flatbed sitting empty in the ditch where nobody had moved it yet. 9 days it took for the deputies to come and go on that road, and at the end of it, they had less than they started with in some ways. No Kingston, no body. Nobody found a boot or a shred of shirt in the ditch by that flatbed, and they went over that stretch of woods with more men than I'd seen up there since I took the job. The ledger from the Foot Locker matched up to licenses in 3 counties, which opens a lot of doors for a sheriff's department, I guess. Even if the man who filled that Foot Locker never turned up to answer for it. Ray told me that much before he stopped coming around. Said it like it was good news, which for the families of those names on the licenses I suppose it was. I got Peter on the shed radio and told him I was done, end of the month. He didn't argue it, which I half expected him to, seeing as how he'd have to find somebody else fool enough to sit up here alone. He just said the check would be waiting for me in Grand Marais, and I should come collect it myself. So I drove down. I had the June dates written on the back of the courthouse envelope, the same one that had been riding around in my truck bed since March, and I dropped my 2 quarters in the slot at the payphone like always. Aubrey answered and didn't ask me a single thing before she put Billy on. I don't know if that was kindness or if she just didn't want to hear whatever I had to say about any of it. Either way, I was glad not to have to say it.
"Dad,"
Billy said.
"is the tower still there?"
"It's still there," I told him. "I'm not going to be in it, but I'll take you up it. 2nd week of June. I've got the dates written down and I'm bringing them to you myself, not mailing them."
"Why not mail them?"
"Because I'd rather hand it to you." He said, "Okay, quiet," in that tone he uses when he's not sure he believes me yet. I let it sit. I figured showing up would do more good than any amount of talking through a phone bolted to a wall. I didn't go into the general store. I don't know what I'd have said to Zoe if I had, standing there with her reading glasses on their little chain, asking me how the tower was treating me. I just got in the truck and drove back up the road. Packing out didn't take long. The toolbox, the duffel, the envelope, all of it went into the truck bed the same way it came in, like the last 2 months had just folded up and disappeared. I left Patrick's notebook on the desk next to the weather binder, both of them closed, side by side. Whoever came after me could open it or not. I wasn't going to be the one who decided that for him. That evening I checked the anemometer out of habit, same as every evening, and it sat dead at 0. No moon at all. By 10, the horn out at Sable Point was rolling up the bluff clear and steady, nothing in the air to soften it. All 3, same as Patrick had it boxed in his notebook. I could have gotten in the truck right then. Wasn't anything keeping me. But I didn't want to leave it like that, not on the last night. So I lit the lamp and left it burning and went out on the catwalk instead. The air was so still up there I could have shouted and it wouldn't have carried 40 yards. I stood at the rail a good while, looking down past the tower legs to where the trees start, and that's when I saw it. Same spot as always, 30 feet in, head tipped back too far, watching my window same as it had every night since I found that notebook under the floor. I didn't reach for the flashlight in my pocket. Didn't see the point in it anymore. I just stood there and let it look, and it stood there and looked. Then, slow, the way it does everything, its head turned away from me and settled on the road. The road was empty. Nobody was coming up it tonight. No headlights, no flatbed grinding through the ruts. It didn't matter. It watched that empty road the same way it had watched Kingston's truck come up 9 nights before, patient as a fence post, like it was still waiting on something that had already happened. I stayed until the horn quit, and a little breeze came up off the lake and moved the treetops. And then I went in and put out the lamp and sat on the cot, with my hands folded until the windows turned from black to gray. At sunrise, I carried the last of it down, all 62 of those steps, same as I'd carried everything else up and down that stairway for 2 months. I walked past the tree line on my way to the truck. The ferns were pressed flat again, fresh, 30 feet in, same shape they'd always been. Nothing was standing in them. I didn't stop to look twice. I put the toolbox in the bed, shut the tailgate, and drove down off the bluff into the last of the morning fog. And I didn't look back at the tower once.